Thank you all. It's nice to be up here with this panel. You had the opportunity to meet the 3 CEOs, so maybe just James, if you're okay after your football injury, you're okay? Yeah, you can. Okay, you can give everybody a little introduction on you.
Thanks. Apparently, that's a piece of focus. We'll take it off your head, I guess. James Murray, founding member of ExSight Ventures and founder and managing member of ExSight Ventures. For us, give brief background. We invest in early stage ophthalmology, drugs, devices, diagnostics, early stage broadly defined, seed to modest Series B. So first check in to modest Series B.
So I think this is probably the first time we're having a panel like this at OIS, kind of after discussing with some of you and hearing some of the issues about topics that should be covered. I thought this was an important one to start to bring to OIS now and hopefully in future meetings. There's lots of different people in the audience. There are lots of entrepreneurs building companies, there are investors, there are all different people who are looking to propagate their science. And there are multiple ways to do that inside of a company. You can be a single asset with a single shot on goal. You can be a single asset with multiple shots on goal. You can be multiple assets with multiple shots on goal. And all of these are viable pathways towards achieving, clinical success and hopefully financial return. And all of the companies up here are clinical stage companies, which is incredible. And one of them is a $350 million public company, I believe is your latest valuation, right? Somewhere around $350 million. So that's all incredible success, and all of you have done an unbelievable job of building your companies. But I kind of want to go back in time a little bit and see if you can give a little bit of insight to the audience on how you ended up where you are. Because it's not common, I don't think, that somebody comes out of the gate having multiple assets on multiple shots on goal, or even a single asset with multiple shots. So maybe, David, you could start and just explain, did ONL start out the way it ended up, or what was the process for you getting to this place? And I'm going to ask all 3 of you to do that afterwards.
I'll give a little background, and to your point, we could describe as a single asset with multiple therapeutic disease states that we could address. And I think, it starts back from the original founding and the scientific discovery or the focus that David Zaks had in the lab to try to look at what would be appropriate targets that are part of a core common pathophysiologic response to a number of disease states in the eye. And I think that strategic insight and direction at the beginning of David's research gave the potential for an asset that could target a receptor that's common across a number of disease states. So that strategic underpinning foundation for the company really enabled an asset like 1204 now to really cross what is unique diseases from glaucoma to AMD and to an acute condition of retinal detachment. That was the underpinnings of the innovation. And then ultimately, I think in the very short term in that beginning of how to fund that through grants and a lot of just scrappy scientific work to be able to at least lay the foundation that could actually be executed on.
And just quickly, when you presented to investors, and we'll get to James' perspective in a minute, but how did you present that as an opportunity to investors?
Sure, I think it's a bit of a mixed blessing. When you can go in a lot of different areas, you get grilled on focus, and to go to a lot of different areas, you can create a lot of opportunity. I think so. I would say that those discussions with investors were across the board that way, and I think as we staged through our development, we led with retinal detachment, which was a smaller market indication, but we felt scientifically, biologically, that was the fastest way to prove targeting the fast receptor in humans, given it was on top of a surgical procedure to be able to assess concentrations of human vitreous, gave us the ability to do that. And that's how we chose it and eventually convinced a number of investors to help support us in that journey. But those are the challenges with that, because, boy, there's huge opportunity to go everywhere, but you need to focus, and how can you stepwise and approach that? And I think, we had a lot of no's and then a few yeses that got us to that first one.
Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I think we knew from the very beginning that this could do a lot of things in the body because, as I mentioned, collagen's pretty ubiquitous in the body, and damaged collagen's a part of most disease processes. But when we started the company, our focus was really on wound care, wound recovery, et cetera, because that's where Bob and I came from. We came from a failed venture in wound care roll-up. I won't go into those details, but I think when we looked at the peptide, we thought, all right, well, in the eye, Bob's an ophthalmologist, how about dry eye or corneal damage or corneal injury? And we did the first series of tests on that. We stayed pretty focused. To David's point, you don't get a lot of points as a startup for trying to do a lot of things. You get a lot of points for being very focused. And we approached it from that perspective and said, okay, we're a dry eye company. One of our scientific advisors is David Calkins at Vanderbilt, and David is a world-renowned expert in nerve processes and vision processes and how they interact with the brain. And he was bugging us about the opportunity to test this in a neuroprotection application. And I finally gave up and said, okay, fine, if you'll stop talking to me about it, we'll do it. And as it turned out, it has some pretty incredible neuroprotective capabilities, as we've shown in the research and as we shared with you guys last year. So that kind of branched us out. And so we tested the waters there, and then we started looking more broadly, and all the while building a knowledge base around collagen damage cycles, disease impacts on collagen, and then likewise how collagen can affect certain disease states. And it's a pretty thin area of research. It's only really been burgeoning in the last 10 years or so. So as we became smarter about it, it created more opportunities for us, and I think that's really how we've evolved to this point.
Riad, how about Oculis? Started out a little differently, right?
Yeah, I would say strategically in the very beginning, so Oculis was a hospital project in Iceland, actually. And in the very beginning, when I joined the company and when we had the board and we discussed strategically what we should do, should we focus on one product, one project, or should we de-risk the portfolio? And the decision was actually to de-risk the portfolio and bring something else. And then the second question was, okay, but the platform we have or the technology we have is not de-risked yet. We didn't know if it works or no. So therefore, we decided by design to bring OCS-02, which does not need the same technology as OCS-01. And it was really by design. So it was truly to de-risk the portfolio. Now that OCS-01 works, or the technology behind it as well works, then we started to extend building on something which works. So therefore, this is the way we build up the portfolio. Now, we are extremely selective in terms of where we go. So there are at least two drivers which are extremely concrete. One, we need to see an unmet medical need. If we do not see an unmet medical need, we do not go. Actually, it's very simple. We really do not go. I have 20 years commercial experience. I know that if you don't have a problem and you don't have the right solution, then commercial is a failure, actually, regardless how exciting is the biology. So therefore, unmet medical need is very important to crystallize it. The second is to understand the biology, or at least to have a hypothesis. Many times we do not have it. If we don't have it, we don't go. And then unmet medical needs really drives where we go in terms of indications, and we need to have a certain confidence about the biology.
So, you know, it's interesting, James. I know that you've done diligence on, I don't know, 1 billion companies in the startup space, probably, and you know, yet you've chosen to make an investment in one of the companies that's on this panel at some point. How does the specter of platform development affect you in the decision-making process? Do you look at these companies differently? Does it make them more attractive, less attractive? Do you change your analysis in any way in trying to understand their capital needs going forward? And how much input do you have as an investor in steering some of that progress?
You've asked a lot there.
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot to unpack. But
we've got a little time. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you take a step all the way back, what underpins all of our investments is really innovative, fascinating science, right? And so, and we want to get to know companies sometimes before there even is a company, and working with the scientists on that development stage and at those early stages of innovation, particularly, you know, in platform type technologies, founders and scientists have a lot of ideas that they can apply it to, right? So what we want to do, and sometimes we work with them to do this, is to boil that down on, and how do we get that focus? How can you get that proof of concept? How can you make sure that you're actually addressing the unmet medical need, you said, but then, you know, to David's point on focusing on retinal detachment first for proof of concept, right? And moving forward from there, right? So it is a different analysis when you're looking at a platform company, and we want to make sure that, you know, you are targeting those different areas and thinking about all of them holistically, but then ultimately you have to drive that to a focus that is then going to be able to de-risk the asset and bring in additional investment. You know, we often see, and we joke internally about this approach sometimes before it's fully baked. We'll see a kitchen sink approach. I think we may have joked about it, right? And it's when a founder or scientist has a really good idea and they say, well, we can do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, you haven't even shown to me that that initial indication, that proof of concept has actually worked yet, right? So hopefully we can then work with them on refining that, and then that way it becomes a clearer story that then can be developed and, you know, hopefully work with external capital partners.
So it's always science first, right? It's always science first rather than potential first, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So still always looking at the science. You know, obviously we agree on that. My feeling, again, having worked with at least two of the companies here a little bit more closely, is that some of these things sort of present themselves as opportunities. Success begets success, right? You start out with a single indication, and then you could potentially use that to generate more revenue and build out products after that. Does it change your strategy at all in terms of how much capital you're going to need, David? Do you think differently because you know that the cost of doing what you really want to do is significantly greater the minute you start expanding the applications?
I think it's a good point and a good question. Maybe share a little bit of history too that both of you know, because both of you supported and your firm supported us when the lights were getting pretty dim to be able to then secure a next round, which was super helpful. But I think to your point on assessing those opportunities, part of our journey in trying to move the program forward with 1204 in the clinic, we had some initial data from retinal detachment that looked really exciting in a phase 1 study, and we came to somewhat of a fork in the road or a choice on investments where we had pretty significant interest in term sheet to move that program into a registrational phase 2-3 retinal detachment acute indication study. And then on the other side was, do we take this time to pause and expand the portfolio into GA and glaucoma, was the other side of the investment thesis. And this was phase 1 data trying to figure that out. And I think with your help, your firm's help, and others, you know, we made the choice. Obviously what we presented today was a pivot at that critical phase 1. Do you move first to get that big phase 2 study done, or do you take the chance to really expand in human development in a couple indications? And so we chose that investment thesis to expand that asset into 3 indications. And where we stand today now is the ability to position phase 2 programs, and we're in our first phase 2 now, and hopefully in the next few years be in 2 more phase 2s across 2 different indications. But that was a pretty intense strategic shift, because there's a lot of discussion to say, boy, move that lead indication forward fast, get the proof of concept, but we, you know, chose to pivot and go to this across. And that was not an easy conversation at the time, but that's how we kind of made the trade-offs. And to your point on maybe money, you know, it's a little bit of a mix. It's the data, the science, but it's a little bit of time, money, development. That phase 2 program, if we chose that, looked like it was going to run 3-4 years. Now, you know, we probably lost about 18 months getting into phase 2, but we took 2 years and expanded the potential across 3 indications.
Eric, how about you? I mean, I know, again, I've had some personal experience with some of those conversations, which I've repressed as much as possible, but, you know, maybe share a little some highlights into how that works for you, again, through the fundraising process.
Yeah, I think from a fundraising perspective, it's been, having a dry eye asset is not one of the top priorities of some investors. And I think one of the things that we struggled with a little bit was we kind of came out of our phase 2 with data that was good, but not prime on our prime data as it relates to our primary endpoints. And we also did that right about the time the market collapsed. So our head scratching led us to a little bit different strategy about how to manage our assets. And we chose to really lean into a couple of things. One was our engagement with the FDA around novel endpoints for neuroprotection of glaucoma. And I think our success in those discussions really enabled us to have an opportunity for a license in that asset, and that really helped us a lot. I think as we figured out a different and novel way to fund the dry eye phase 3 trial, that then opened the door for us to look at some additional indications, because we knew that we were going to have some additional development needs that we were going to be focusing in on during 2024. So that's the reason for considering GA and myopia as follow-on indications with the asset. There's more. I mean, I'm sure David has more in his portfolio that he's thinking about, and Riad as well. We've got other indications in the eye that we're quite excited about. But at a certain point, you kind of got to husband your resources, make sure you're not wasting time and money on things, and that's what we pride ourselves on, being efficient with capital. So that's what we want to try to do.
Riad, you've got a whole other set of headaches in the public markets, right? I mean, you have a whole bunch of other investors to answer to indirectly through your share price. So how do you navigate the capital needs of a public company that's got multiple programs in place at the same time? And is there any additional scrutiny that you face from analysts or other people who might be significant investors who want to, sort of put you to task and make sure that you're moving the way you're supposed to move? Do you have the freedom to operate independently as you'd like to, pursue what you want to pursue? How does it work for you?
Yeah. No, I think portfolio strategy as a public company, at least in my experience, helps because you have a multiple shot on goal. Your risk is mitigated. If one product does not work, the other will work. Or probability of success for the whole portfolio is higher than one project. So I would say, as a public company, portfolio helps and mitigate your risks, because it's very different between a private company where the risk is taken at the VC level, where they basically invest in multiple companies and they are doing their multiple shot on goal, while a public company, the dynamic is slightly different, and actually managing your own risk is better for public investors. So therefore, in my experience, it helps. Now, I totally agree with what Eric and David said about expansion. I mean, expansion, it can be portfolio expansion, it can be even geographic expansion, it is exactly the same, is not only a chance, is first a risk, actually. Any expansion is a risk. And many times we see only the potential win, but we need to be extremely mindful about the risk, because expanding something means that you have a lack of focus on the first project, basically. It's automatic. I mean, regardless how we want to explain it, this is what will happen. So therefore, unless you are extremely mindful and you manage efficiently your resources, cash, but also your team, and where to focus and how to synchronize, is really orchestra, and how to synchronize your project and your milestones and how to build up, you lose. So being mindful about the risk you are taking by adding on your project, on your portfolio, is a key to succeed. If you don't see the risk, then you will succeed. You will fail, actually, because it's risky.
Thank you all. James, I think that we would all like to see many of the companies here today on the stage or out in the room, grow up and become public companies, right? Or have some sort of exit in some capacity. And we've seen in ophthalmology in the past year or two some companies that have entered the public space at high valuations. And in the retina space, those may be single assets and single indications. And I think there's lots of ways for companies to exit. Investors have some input into the path that a startup takes when it chooses a level of financing at a certain stage in their development. And certainly the companies that you're involved with here are moving in that direction. Fortunately, they seem to be progressing. What are your thoughts? I mean, do you encourage companies to exit quickly? Would you rather see some of them go through the process of an additional round of capital raising in order to propagate them to build value? Or do you think that exiting into the public space, which is something that's been proposed to our portfolio many times, is a smarter option? What are your thoughts on in the current financial climate what companies should be thinking about as a potential exit here.
Yeah, I mean, I was scarred from previous life just on companies going public far too early, and I think, you know, anyone that's been through that and having to answer for that sees a deleterious effect on their shareholder price as they continue to raise capital, and just watch it go down. So for us, it's about getting to an inflection point and hopefully exiting to somebody that can then take the asset on and fund it themselves rather than future dilutive capital raises all the way through. But in order to do that, you need to be able to drive down multiple paths at the same time. So whether that's partnering discussions on individual assets or partnering discussions for the whole company or an exit, either through acquisition or IPO, you need to be able to drive all of those things. And, you know, I think what we've seen in companies do that have done it well are the ability to execute on all of those simultaneously and to drive that. And we invested in a company, actually a San Diego company called DTX, and their initial indication was ophthalmology. But ultimately that fell back, and that was a good risk mitigation as the market cooled to RP indications, right? And they were able to use some non-dilutive funding to catapult the secondary indication, which ultimately led to an acquisition of the entire portfolio and the entire technology by Novartis. So to kind of very circuitously answer your question, you need to be able to consider all of the various options. For us as investors, though, we would like to, you know, maximize our shareholder value by not taking on a lot of dilutive capital, as you know.
Yeah, I'll shorten that answer is we want you to exit early. That's the answer. Just, you know, sorry, no, I mean, no, exactly. I understand. I mean, we have these conversations on a regular basis inside, you know, of our portfolio as well about how to move, you know, funding forward in an especially challenging climate. So, you know, David, you put up a slide. I think you said you're going to be doing a $100 million raise. You know, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're going to get approached by lots of different people during the course of this process, and have you contemplated, you know, what the options will be, and how do you prepare for those options?
Sure, good question. I think it's, Praveen said it in his earlier talk about being flexible and keeping options open, so I think it is important to that. I mean, I think we have a base case of that. We need the funding to run the studies, and our ultimate North Star is to move the technology as far and as fast and efficiently through the clinic as we can. And I think that we're keeping ourselves open to a number of those options. We've had investment from strategics along the way that has been super helpful, not just in dollars, but in real clinical development, meaningful support, which has been really good. And so we're keeping ourselves open to those. We had some investment from VC firm Kaitai Capital out of China that we've opened our eyes to about potential licensing to a kind of market like that to maybe offset the need to raise a little bit more capital. So I think we're keeping our options open, as has been said throughout yesterday and today. It's a tough world out there. We all think we've got good technologies, but you got to keep plugging along to keep the options open. And then just as maybe I mentioned earlier about making that choice on a term sheet for a lead indication to a phase 2 study or a term sheet to broaden the portfolio, I hope we'll be in a position to think about what would be the right option with a few of those there. But I think the name of the game is keep the options open.
Eric, how about you? Have you talked to banks at all? Do you discuss these things at a higher level? I mean, because, you know, like, again, everybody here, including us, everybody's looking to raise money, right? So do you involve these people at an early stage, get feedback, and try and consider the next steps at this point?
Yeah, we do. I think we're in a little bit of a transition mode right now. Getting our dry eye trial funded was a big thing for us. It allows us to prove out the nerve repair aspect of, dry eye disease and our impact on that. And I think that's going to really help us late next year. But we are in a mode where we're trying to make some decisions about various assets, and we're having, you know, both strategic discussions as well as funding discussions. And we kind of got to get all that sorted out over the next 90 days or so that we've got a good direction for the full year going ahead. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a Series B next year. We're going to have to raise a Series B. I think we've got an opportunity to have a very nice improvement in our value. So as a result of the relationships we've established, so we're thrilled about that opportunity. We want to make the right steps. And the first deal is easy. right? Because you got a deal and everybody gets excited and they jump up and down. The next deal is much more critical. The decision-making around the next deal in a portfolio company is very, very critical because there's IP questions, there's partner quality questions, there's, is it time to do that deal right now or should you wait and put more time and effort into it kind of questions. So we're still in the process of sorting that out. Things have happened in a hurry for us, frankly, over the last 6 months.
Riad, how did you become a public company? Did you go through this thought process? Listening to this, does it sound familiar to the way it was processed at the Oculis level before you decided to, go public, or was there thought of staying private, or how did that process evolve for you?
No, we were excited actually to go public. The environment was difficult, and many people say to us that we were crazy, but in the end of the day, it worked out very well. And we raised overall this year 146 million, which is good, which actually allows us to finance all our projects till the end of 25. So it's good, but all what I am hearing from my colleague, I did it, of course, and I will continue to do it. So it's, yeah.
David, the biggest challenge you have right now, besides capital raising, what do you think the biggest challenges are? Are they different for you as a platform company than they are for a single asset, single shot company?
Sure. Beyond capital, I think on our indications of choice, I think the GA pathway is pretty clear and precedented with a number of groups. So I feel like we're moving our program forward with that. I think the exciting data on neuroenhancement I just shared on glaucoma, the challenge gets to what are the right endpoints, how do you time a study to do that? There's been a lot of failures in the past. I think that's the biggest challenge, other than raising the funding to get it going, in 24 is for our team to sort that out. We think glaucoma and neuroprotection is a huge opportunity. We got to do our homework to structure the right study to move into phase 2 with that.
And Eric, how about you? Challenges that you foresee coming up that you need to navigate?
Yeah, I think for us, and it's the same challenge we ran into when we were facing the neuroprotection program. We had great data, but where do you take it? Because it's going to be memantine all over again, and you hear that over and over and over again. So we decided we were going to take on big challenges, so we spent time with FDA, and we worked for about 10 months on proving to them that we could go in a different direction on endpoints. And I think we're going to face the same thing more than likely with myopia, just because the myopia trials seem to be structured around rebound effect and that kind of thing. And I think that's going to be a challenge we're going to have to wrestle to the ground as we go into that area.
And James, assuming you had this giant wad of money that you needed to invest right now and you were going to look to deploy it into companies like this, does it change your investment style and process, understanding the challenges that these companies have and what their capital needs could potentially be? Going forward, do you think differently about how you deploy capital into companies like this?
Are you handing out the $100 million? Is that
sure?
Is that
I got it right here
All
in
right.
my pocket.
I like to hope not, right? Because essentially it all comes down to being disciplined with and focused on your ability to execute, right? And hopefully we could be a greater resource and provide those resources that are needed for these companies to move forward and to, as you say, propagate their internal assets and to move them forward. But you still need to show a very clear, disciplined development plan. And that means, really figuring out what those individual markets look like and making sure they're complementary. The one thing that stuck out to me in listening to each of you present, and I'm obviously very familiar with O&L, somewhat familiar with Stuart, and less so because Oculis is a public company, but there's a clear through line for each company. Even though you're platform technology, it's easy to tell that story, whether it's fast inhibition, collagen, or topical approaches, right? So I think if we were to have that money, we would still want the story to be, well, why are we focusing on this area, and how are we going to drive that forward? And then who are the potential partners? Because O&L is retina focused. Stuart, you're anterior and posterior segment, so the partners you're talking to and their strategic priorities may be vastly different, right? So you still need to spend that time doing that homework, but listen, if you're handing out the $100 million, I'd be happy to write larger checks and help these companies move forward.
Yes, I'm working on it. Working on it. Riad, we at OIS, we generally have less of a clarity on the future in terms of public success, and John Orris did a great job of giving us an update in the markets, and Praveen gave us a good update today and whatnot. But what's your perspective on ophthalmology as an investment target for the public space? I know we all kind of feel like we're in this pit of capital raising hell, but out there are public companies doing very well. And what's the perspective, in your sense from analysts and people that you speak to on a regular basis?
It would be hard to do and to speak after Praveen. His presentation was actually excellent, exceptional. I would say, just building on what he said, I think we have still unmet medical need in ophthalmology. I mean, you take DME, which is a disease we know in Oculis, 60% of patients are not treated, 40% out of the treated patients are not well treated. Wet AMD the same, GA the same. Glaucoma, I mean, we have 80 million of glaucoma patients, and we know that between 10 to 20% of patients, even if they are compliant and they are taking IOP lowering, they will be blind, they will lose their vision. So therefore, the need for innovation in ophthalmology is important. And so far, the payers in the US and Europe and elsewhere show that they are very supportive of real innovation in ophthalmology. Anti-VEGF are well supported, complement are well supported, and so on. So therefore, I am actually optimistic. And now, of course, life is never like this, it will be like this. Ophthalmology will be the same, but I am extremely optimistic actually about innovation in ophthalmology. And I mean, if there is one message, I really count on investors and strategics to continue to support innovation in ophthalmology. I think it's needed.
Yeah, I think that's the theme that's kind of been sort of brought up several times throughout this, meeting about the need for strategic involvement at an early stage. And I think much like everybody's, current attitude towards cash, people are preserving it, and it's definitely making it a little bit more challenging. I think we all agree, and I know we do as investors, and I know I've had the conversation with James, and we all feel like this is not a permanent situation. And weathering the storm is going to be critical. Just one last, 1 minute comment, if you can, from the companies. Anything that we should know about your future development, things that you're looking forward to doing that we may not have been hearing about today that you're willing to discuss?
I'll just jump in. I think we covered a number of them, but I think to the question comment was made before, I think there are some underlying opportunities in the acute space that we are really excited about, in addition to these large chronic markets that we continue to press on for new opportunities.
Eric, I know we've heard a lot about myopia. I think that's probably your biggest exciting push forward at this point.
Yeah, the only thing about myopia is you have to keep taking your assumptions further and further down to make the numbers look reasonable because so many people are going to be involved. I think if there was an area that we haven't talked about that we would have an interest in and getting involved in, and we've got some new data that's pretty exciting about, is dealing with vascular challenges in ophthalmology, dealing with diabetic-related indications, challenges where the vascular system breaks down in the eye. We've done some interesting tests in diabetic knockout mice that give us some hope that there's a real chance for us to do something there as well. So that we're not fully developed yet there, but that's a pretty exciting opportunity as well.
And Riad, thanks, Eric. And Riad, without exposing you to the SEC in any way, let me ask: are there disease indications that you're excited about that you may have heard some interesting data on presented here as well?
I mean, we have already a broad portfolio, so I think James said two words which are really important. One, execution, and the second one is discipline. And I would say in Oculis, we want to execute in a very disciplined way what we need to execute the next 2 years, and this is my goal.
Great. I just before I want to thank everybody on the panel. I think this was great, and I think it's a little bit different for everybody here, perspective of companies that have propagated successfully forward and expanded their portfolios. I just want to say one unrelated thing, and this was brought to my attention by a member of the group here today. I think that in a completely non-political and non-judgmental way, there are some people who are not at this meeting today who have been a large part of the ophthalmology innovation community. Most of those people are in Israel. Many of the CEOs of companies who normally present here are actually in active military service right now. I think it's important to acknowledge their absence, and hopefully we'll continue to see them in future meetings. I know that Craig had hopes of potentially doing another OIS Israel meeting at some point, so hopefully we'll get that. And I just remember to keep them all in your thoughts and prayers throughout this, horror in the Middle East. But with that, I just want to say thank you all. I think this was a great panel, and I appreciate your candor and input for the audience.
Thanks, Rob.